topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
What's working on purpose anyway? Each week, we ponder the answer to this question. People ache for meaning and purpose at work, to contribute their talents passionately and know their lives really matter. They crave being part of an organization that inspires them and helps them grow into realizing their highest potential. Business can be such a force for good in the world, elevating humanity. In our program, we provide guidance and inspiration to help usher in this world we all want, working on purpose. Now, here's your host, Dr. Alise Cortez.
Welcome back to the Working on Purpose program. Thanks for tuning in this week. It's great to have you. I have been hosting this show since February of 2015. It is a labor of love. I'm your host, Dr. Alise Cortez. If we haven't met before and you don't know me, I'm a management consultant, organizational logotherapist, speaker, and author. My team and I at Alise Cortez and Associates help companies to enliven and fortify their operations by articulating their purpose and building inspirational leaders and cultures activated by meaning and purpose to turn those companies from a flatline EKG to a vibrant destination workplace. There, people are intrinsically motivated to perform at their best, grow to their fuller potential, and are committed to stay and dynamic deliver on the company's mission. You can learn more about us and how we can work together at alisecortez.com. Getting into today's program, we have with us Eduardo Briceno. He is a global keynote speaker and facilitator who guides many of the world's leading companies in developing cultures of learning and high performance. Earlier in his career, he was the co-founder and CEO of Mindset Works, the first company to offer growth mindset development services. He's the author of The Performance Paradox, Turning the Power of Mindset into Action, and joins us today from San Jose, California. Eduardo, welcome to Working on Purpose.
Thank you, Alise. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So good to have you on. As I mentioned before we got on air, I thoroughly enjoyed your book and devoured it. So I want to start with sort of maybe a common denominator here. I have been greatly affected by Dr. Carol Dweck's work on the growth mindset, but you have been deeply and transformed by her work. So can we start with the story of how you met her and how knowing her work and working together has changed your life?
Absolutely. It has changed my life in so many dimensions and the lives of so many other people. But I met her when I was in grad school. I was looking to pivot in my career and actually try to find purpose. That was and develop purpose. That was a big reason why I went to grad school. And I was exploring different social entrepreneurship ideas, and I studied business and education. And she was looking for somebody with a business background that I had. And so we were introduced to, because she was interested in bringing the idea of growth mindset out into the world, in particular to schools, to help schools develop cultures of learning, cultures of growth mindset, cultures that assumed that people can change and develop rather than just kind of perform all the time and show how good they are. It's more about kind of, instead of proving, improving. And so when I learned, we were introduced and I learned about her work and I read her book and we started talking every 2 weeks. And I realized in learning about her work that my beliefs had gotten in the way of my goals. I had gotten in my own way, in fixed mindset beliefs that I had in different areas of my life. And we can talk about what that is. But that was the first way that her work changed my life, is just to increase my self-awareness and realize how some of the ways I was thinking about myself and my abilities and also the abilities of other people were just really creating problems. Then, I co-founded Mindset Works with her, and she's been my mentor for 16 years. So that's been, life-changing in and of itself. I actually had dinner with her 2 days ago. So it's been amazing to be on this journey with her as a supporter and mentor.
Such a testament to the power of who we can attract and recruit into our lives to transform our lives. It's so amazing. I don't remember when it was I got exposed to her work, Eduardo, but I remember reading, her book on the growth mindset. And I've, of course, embraced that work for years. I've met so many people, though, who don't know about this work, though. So maybe let's start with if you could contrast or distinguish fixed versus growth mindset, as she talks about.
Absolutely. Yeah. A lot of people don't know about her work. And then a lot of people also know about growth mindset, but also have an understanding that's different from what it actually is. So when we ask people what a growth mindset is, We often hear it's about working hard, or it's about persevering, or having high expectations. And a growth mindset is none of those things. So a growth mindset is a perspective about the nature of human beings, is the belief that we can change, the belief that our abilities or qualities are malleable and we can develop them, as opposed to a fixed mindset, which is when we think of our abilities and qualities as things that are static. So for example, if we think that intelligence is something that people either have or don't have, or have at a particular level, that would be a fixed mindset about intelligence. Versus anybody can become smarter, that would be a growth mindset about intelligence. Or if we think people are great leaders because they're natural leaders, that would be an indication of a fixed mindset. We think that they either have it or they don't have it. Or if we think that kind of introversion and extroversion are things that don't change in people. So we can think about any quality or ability as, things that we develop, or things that are fixed, or somewhere in between. And our beliefs can shift too. It's not like somebody's a growth mindset person and another is a fixed mindset person. We all have fixed mindset beliefs about certain things, and those things change based on our circumstances. And so, there's always fruitful work in working on our own self-awareness and thinking about how these beliefs are affecting us. Because what research shows is that when we believe that we can't change, what we then start to do is trying to prove ourselves, to prove that we are naturals and we are smart and we are talented. And so we do the things that we already know how to do well and perfectly and without mistakes and quickly. And if we make mistakes, we try to hide them. We might kind of react defensively to feedback. We give up when we encounter challenges. So there's a lot of consequences to it being in a fixed mindset. And that's why, I had gotten into trouble in my career, and how learning about growth mindset really helped me become more self-aware and more effective.
Mm-hmm. Very, very powerful way to distinguish that. Thank you, Eduardo. One of the things that I really wanted to make sure we talked about, because I know this is a very common thing that's walking around in people's minds, is the idea of just the way to improve is simply to work hard. And you dispel that myth quite handily in the book. Can you talk a little bit more about why it's not just about working hard to help us improve?
Yeah, that was another issue that I ran into. Is I just figured that I just had to work hard. And if you just work hard, you'll get better. And that's the key to success. And what I've realized and what I've learned is that there's actually two different types of hard work. There's hard work to perform or execute, and there's hard work to improve or learn. And I call those the performance zone and the learning zone. And so we tend to kind of walk around thinking that the way somebody becomes great at something is just by doing that activity for many, many hours, and then they become great. But that's not true. So if you look at research, for example, if you look at a great athlete, when they are playing a tournament match that is a high stakes match, they're focused on performing. So they focus on what they already know well. They're trying to minimize mistakes. If they're having trouble with a particular move, they're going to avoid that move during that match, because their goal is to win points. And we think we only see that. We only see them performing. We think that the way they became so great was just to playing a lot of matches. But actually what they do after the match is how they improve. After the match, they'll say, this move that I was avoiding during the match, that's what I want to practice now, because that's my opportunity for improvement. So it's when we're focused on beyond what we can do, doing things that we don't know how to do well, taking risks and going beyond the known. That's what is called the learning zone. And that is what enables us to improve. And so we need to embed both the performance zone and the learning zone are both really critical. But most of us tend to get stuck in chronic performance and just trying to get things done as best as we know how, trying to minimize mistakes. And that works while we're novices. If we don't know how to do something, we will get better just by trying to do it, but then we'll stagnate, even though we're working really hard. And so we're putting a lot of effort, we're not getting better, and we conclude we can't get better, right? So that's a fixed mindset. But the reality is that we're not using the right strategies. We're only we're stuck in chronic performance. There are people who also over-index on the learning zone side. When they learn about this distinction, they realize, oh, I'm spending too much time on the learning zone. I'm not performing, and so I'm not getting results, and I'm not contributing. So we do need both of these zones and figure out how do we foster kind of habits and systems to engage in both of these zones as individuals and as teams and organizations.
So much great stuff on all of that, Eduardo. Now, one of the things I also wanted to have you address, which we talked about just briefly before we got on air together, and it's just with the notion of developing and implementing habits and strategies that support growth. So whatever those might be, as I told you, one of my habits and one of my strategies is that I host a show every week for 8.5 years, and I read the book cover to cover. That is a habit and a strategy that I use to support my growth. Can you say a bit more about how people can develop those habits and strategies?
Absolutely. Yeah, that is such a kind of conscious and deliberate habit that enables you both to learn and perform, right? Because the conversations that you have with your guests are so much richer because you've read the books and you've gone deep into their work. And so it allows you to grow, and it also allows you to perform at a high level at the same time. And so, yes, most of our behavior is driven by our habits. What is our default, the things that we do every day, every week. And so we need to think about how do we embed those systems and habits so that they support performance, but also so that they support learning. And often our systems and habits are just supporting performance. So, for example, in LinkedIn, they have a weekly meeting with the top 100 leaders. And in most weekly meetings in most companies, they're all about performance, right? They're about what needs to be done by when, how do we keep ourselves accountable? All those things are really important, but we haven't kind of put in the systems for learning. And so one thing they did, as among many things, is they put a section of the weekly agenda that was only to share what people have learned recently in the prior week and what people can do differently as a result of that insight. So that's a really easy way to change the conversation, is just to change the agenda. And it creates a habit, a system to both perform and learn at the same time. Just like for you, you make it a habit to continue to learn, to read the books of your guests, and that ensures your growth and your performance.
Yeah, and I study them, like as I mentioned to you. And again, then I use that as that's my ongoing research. When I'm also out writing articles or speaking, I can actually cite these sources. So and then it contributes to my performance, as you're saying. Now you have a habit of getting up every single day, and then you have something that you say to yourself before you open your laptop. Tell us what that is again.
Well, I do several things. That my morning habit is my most treasured habit. Is my most important habit. It starts with gratitude. That puts things in perspective, and it helps me see the good in the world about what's most important. But so I do several things. But one of the things that I do that is really important to me is to remind myself every morning of what I'm working to improve in myself.
Yes,
So
yes.
that improvement is not just a reactionary thing where when I make mistakes, that's important too. But I'm driving my own evolution. My default is to continue to change every day and to work toward that in a proactive way.
I love that. I'm driving my own evolution. Can I steal that?
Absolutely.
Okay, good. As long as I give you credit. Okay, great. All right. So one of the other things that I found so compelling about what you've written here, and I want to see this happen in many more organizations, whether I get to consult with them or not, is you talk about in your book, you say, in my work, I found that people feel uplifted as they find new ways of working that are more effective, enriching, and joyful. And they discover more ways to let go of fear and pursue creativity, exploration, experimentation. So instead of being guarded with their colleagues, they're reveling in getting feedback, and they're growing from that. That's the world that I want to live in, and that's the organizations. Those are the destination workplaces that I'm trying to help create. Can you say a bit more about why this is important and how can organizations achieve this?
Yeah. So when we see ourselves as work in progress, as we understand that everybody can continue to improve, it it reduces our anxiety because and nobody's perfect, right? And
Right.
we're not going to do anything perfectly. There's always going to be room for improvement. And so when we make mistakes or when we don't do something flawlessly, it doesn't we don't get anxious. We are not ashamed of ourselves. We don't try to hide those things from other people, especially if we're in a community that has that common understanding. And so, but it's also more joyful, right? We're exploring more, we're discovering more, we're being more curious about each other. So we're asking more questions, listening better. That means that we are developing trust, forming deeper bonds with each other, which allows us to collaborate better, both for learning and for performing, and to have more fun together, like knowing each other better. And so when we embed the learning zone, the performance zone together, it changes not only the performance, not only the outcomes, which is important, but also the process, right? The experience of living and working is richer because we are we're learning every day and we're learning together. So when we think about purpose, we can think about the purpose of our work. Like, if I work at a pharmaceutical company that's helping people get, heal from disease, that's an important purpose. But also we can think of the purpose of growing together, right? The purpose of learning together, the purpose of the process, that what we can gain from the way that we work, not only in the outcomes.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's just beautiful. I want to see more organizations do that, especially as the need for upskilling and continually learning is just so important. So if we can create that kind of environment, much better chance. So let's let our listeners and viewers think about what we've been saying so far as the sort of the foundation here. Give them a quick break. I'm your host, Dr. Alise Cortez. We've been on here with Eduardo Briceno. He's a global keynote speaker and facilitator who guides many of the world's leading companies in developing cultures of learning and high performance. He's the author of The Performance Paradox, Turning the Power of Mindset into Action. We've been talking about some of the basics in his book, The Foundations. After the break, we're going to get more into the nitty gritty of the concepts. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Dr. Alise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Alise to speak to your organization, please visit her at alisecortez.com. Let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Alise Cortez. To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Alise, send an email to Alise, A-L-I-S-E, at alisecortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Thanks for staying with us and welcome back to Working on Purpose. I'm your host, Dr. Alise Cortez, as I, too, am dedicated to helping create a world where people realize their potential at work and are led by inspirational leaders that help them find and contribute their greatness, and we do business that betters the world. I, too, continue to write my own books. My latest book is called The Great Revitalization, How Activating Meaning and Purpose Can Radically Enliven Your Business, and it was written to help leaders understand what today's workforce really wants and how to meet them there, and then offers 22 best practices to help you get there. You can learn more about my books and how to get a hold of them at alisecortez.com or on Amazon. If you are just joining me today, my guest is Eduardo Briceno. He's the author of The Performance Paradox, Turning the Power of Mindset into Action. So I know you've already mentioned this a little bit here, Eduardo, but I want to dig in a little bit deeper here. And that is from your the tournament and the range chapter here. As you can probably see from the notes I sent you, I'd like to try to pull out something from each of your chapters just because I love to be able to bring them alive. So what I thought was really interesting about that particular chapter was you make mention of Brooks and Wang's study that illustrates practice doesn't make better if we practice by simply doing the things we already know, which you already said before. But then it goes on more interestingly. You say true effective practice looks very different. It involves focusing on specific sub-skills, trying something challenging, ensuring there are feedback loops to identify opportunities for improvement, making adjustments, and trying again. And it's really about paying attention to what you haven't mastered yet, grappling with something we don't yet understand or do well. That's what it is to be in the learning zone. As I said to you in those notes, I think that is one of the most powerful distinctions from common understanding of practicing that I've ever heard.
Well, thank you. We use that word practice sometimes in different ways, right?
Yeah,
sometimes
liberally.
We might say, I'm going to go practice X, right? I'm going to practice soccer, and then we just play soccer. And that's not effective. It's not an effective way to practice. Or we might say, this doctor has been practicing for 10 years. They've been practicing medicine for 10 years. Well, they really have been performing medicine is what we mean. They've been seeing patients and treating patients. But like you say, practice to improve, means we need to be deliberate about improvement. We need to identify what specific sub-skill am I going to work on? How am I going to go about it? It means, going beyond what I can do and figuring out what I'm doing wrong. So getting feedback from what I'm doing, making adjustments, ideally with the guidance of a coach or a teacher. And there's different learning strategies that we can use to practice different skills, but it means being deliberate about improvement, not just doing the activity.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. And then we go on to the next chapter, which kind of speaks to what you were saying there, and that's integrating the learning zone and the performance zone. And I thought that what's interesting about that chapter there is you say we don't learn by doing, but we can learn while doing. And you say most of us will find our greatest opportunities not in dedicating blocks of time solely to the learning zone, but in changing the way we work. So we regularly leap beyond the known while getting things done. That is really powerful. I think I can't even imagine what organizations would look like if more of them could create cultures that are anchored in that kind of a space.
Yeah, because if you think about an athlete, or a violinist or a ballerina, they do a very specific thing, and what the top in the world block large blocks of time to dedicate themselves to doing deliberate practice on very specific sub skills. And by the way, it's not like 10 or 12 hours a day. It's like, depending on the field, it's between 2 and 5 hours a day for the top world class performers. And they don't do it for more than, an hour and a half, sometimes no more than a half hour at a time, because it requires deep concentration. You need a lot of rest. But for most of us, we have a lot of skills involved in our jobs, and we have a lot of things to do. And so for the biggest opportunity for most of us is not to block long blocks of time to work on specific sub skills, although that can be helpful, but it's more like about how we work, right? It's about taking on challenges that we don't know how to do, going into the unknown. There's this outcome that we're trying to achieve that is ambitious, and we are not sure. We don't know all the answers that we will need, but we know that we can figure them out along the way. And we know the process, right? We know whether it's soliciting feedback or experimenting, right? We know that if we go through these processes, we're going to figure out the answers along the way and be able to achieve this ambitious goal.
Mm. It's just, for me, I find that incredibly compelling and very exciting and encouraging and inspiring, all of those things, right? To me, that's so elevating. And a great example of what this looks like in action, you have to share this story that you share in the book about your keynote Boston consulting gig that you delivered without power. So it set the whole stage. I won't give the rest of it away, but I mean, I've been in, difficult spots, but not that. So can you share that story?
Yeah, that was pretty challenging. I was because we want to be engaging in the learning zone proactively all every day, but sometimes we're forced into it, and that was the situation. So I had an important kind of high stakes kind of virtual keynote that I was doing for Boston Consulting Group, the most senior partners all over the world. And they are very busy people. They only come together once a year for an event for their most senior partners. And so we had kind of, and I had worked with them in several offices before, and they really liked my work. So they wanted to introduce it to all their senior partners. And we collaborated in the learning zone to prepare this session together, right? To make sure it was going to land, it was going to be aligned to their strategy. There were two different hosts there were two sessions for two different time zones. So we practiced with the hosts. And so we spent a good amount of time in the learning zone in this case. And then I was ready to get into the performance zone. And one of the sessions was at like 1:30 in the morning. I was living in Santa Fe, New Mexico at the time. And I woke up at around, 12:30 or 12:15. I woke up a little bit earlier than my alarm was set for. And this is at midnight, in the middle of the night, because it was for people in a different part of the world. And I walked into my bathroom and I turned on the lights and nothing happened. And I turn on the other light and nothing happens. And I look outside the window and the whole neighborhood is dark. And I realize, wow, there's no power. What do I do? I need to do a virtual keynote. This is in the middle of COVID. And so I started brushing my teeth and thinking, what are my options? And I thought maybe I could drive into town and try to find some Wi-Fi somewhere. Maybe somebody, there's a restaurant that has a generator or Starbucks or something. But I Santa Fe only has 84,000 people, and it doesn't have a lot of things open at night. And so, I thought that I might just kind of be driving around and not finding a place. And so I sent them an email saying, hey, like, I'm without power. I'm trying to find solutions, just so you know the situation. And then I realized, okay, well, maybe, if I drive the car to a parking lot that where the restaurant might be closed, but I might be able to access their Wi-Fi, and I can kind of light my face with my car lighting. And okay, that could possibly work. I might be able to find Wi-Fi, but it's going to be awkward, and it's going to be, my face is going to be relatively dark. And then that gave me the idea of using the car internal lights to light my face. Gave me the idea that maybe I could use the car headlights to light myself if I just I moved my desk outside. This is what I ended up doing. I moved the desk outside in front of my garage. It was like a dirt driveway. And I put both of our cars in front of me with the headlights just lighting me up. I used my phone as a hotspot, which was luckily charged, and I had an external charger. And I didn't know if it was going to work, because I didn't know if the internet was going to be good enough. This is in Santa Fe, where there's like bears and mountain lions. I didn't know, like, in the middle of the night, if something was going to happen, like be attracted to the lights. And then there were the neighbors too. I didn't know if somebody was really going to come complain that I was doing a keynote outside in the middle of the night. So I was taking some risk, right? I had to leap into the unknown and say, hey, this may or may not work, but I don't have another option. My best idea to perform and to do the job here and to add value is going to be to take a risk, do something I haven't done before. And that means that I'm going to be learning while doing, and it's not the best idea. Like, it's not the ideal situation in that case. Like, if I had like learned this lesson before, then I wouldn't be needing to take those risks, right? So now I have, for example, 2 internet service providers. So if something like this happened, I would have more options, and I have like some kind of backup power that I could use. But it was a lesson that I learned, and by the way, it worked. So and it worked, and it also, like, they loved it, right? Because it was a story that exemplified a growth mindset. It exemplified taking risk when you need to in order to get the job done. And it helped them kind of with their goals of promoting a growth mindset and promoting more sensible risk taking. And I told them, it's like, if this doesn't work, then, it's okay. Like, we're going to be okay, but we're going to put our best foot forward. And so sometimes we're forced to leap into learning while doing. But most of the time, we want to choose learning while doing. We want to be taking risks in reasonable ways that are going to lead to learning and higher performance, and just be mindful about doing those experiments in a way that is not, ideally, we don't want to take risks in ways that are going to bring us down, that are high stakes, where the mistakes are going to hurt people. And so we want to just be mindful about in what ways do we want to engage in the learning zone, but just make sure that we're always doing it.
I think it's such a powerful example of one, as a logotherapist, of course, I traffic in meaning, but it also really showcases the power of an activated human spirit, to find a solution and to know that and to trust in yourself that I'm sure your nerves were probably bothering you, but I didn't hear that you were undone by this. So I'm thinking about, the leaders listening to this. If you have a guy like this on your team or a gal like this in your team, boy, I hope that you are appreciating them, recognizing them, and showcasing them as a fantastic example to help others do the same. I can imagine somebody else would have said, well, I guess, there's no power. I'm not delivering the talk. No options. You found all kinds of options. I think it's a fantastic illustration of a growth mindset in action. Imagine that. Okay, so next, you have a whole chapter on which contains 6 essential learning zone strategies. And this is really about developing different competencies for different learning zone strategies. And so you're talking about reflecting on various ways. So could you maybe just share 1 or 2 of them that you think maybe make sense for this conversation?
Absolutely. So one example is kind of developing what I call our air sense, which is our integrated knowledge and skills. And sometimes in the era of the internet and artificial intelligence, we might think we don't need to learn things because we can always search for the information. But really, there's a lot of value to, like you do when you read your books and in other ways, right? For us to continue to build our understanding of the world, our understanding of humans, our understanding of what we can do as leaders. If we have that knowledge and that wisdom inside of us, then we can call upon it whenever we need it. And so, but just like when you said that you were reading books, you weren't just reading books, you're reading books to in a deliberate ways and using strategies to really put those things into your long-term knowledge and be able to retrieve it when you want it. And that is not just reading passively. You are deliberately building your integrated knowledge and skills, which is an important thing to do in life.
Mm-hmm. Spot on. Okay, at this juncture, let's go ahead and grab our last break here. I am your host, Dr. Alise Cortez. We've been on the air with Eduardo Briceno. He's a global keynote speaker and facilitator who guides many of the world's leading companies in developing cultures of learning and high performance. He's the author of The Performance Paradox, Turning the Power of Mindset into Action, which we've been talking about. After the break, we're going to learn a little bit more as to why mistakes are a good thing. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Dr. Alise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Alise to speak to your organization, please visit her at alisecortez.com. Let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Alise Cortez. To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Alise, send an email to Alise, A-L-I-S-E, at alisecortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Thanks for staying with us and welcome back to Working on Purpose. I'm your host, Dr. Alise Cortez. As I mentioned in the last break, my last book, The Great Revitalization, is out. What I did for you is I created a 3-page assessment. I put it on my website for you, and it will help you ascertain the extent to which your culture meets the standards of today's workforce. It's at alisecortez.com, and it's on the tab, what we do to help. If you are just joining us today, my guest is Eduardo Briceno. He is the author of The Performance Paradox, Turning the Power of Mindset into Action. And as I mentioned just before the break, I think this next bit we're going to talk about is really, really compelling here about mistakes, and specifically the neurobiology that is behind that. So you have this is in the Unleashing the Power of Mistakes chapter. But I think it's interesting that you talk about, that many of us understand that we can learn from our mistakes and that they can make us stronger. But you say the reality is even more compelling. You say that even at a biological level, mistakes are crucial when it comes to changing our brains and developing our abilities. You go on to talk about a podcaster that deals with this, Andrew Huberman. But what I thought was really, really interesting here is you go on to say, errors prompt our brain to sit up and pay attention. Something new is happening here. Since nobody wants to actively pursue tragedies, and because it's hard to proactively elicit surprises, the most effective way to drive our own neuroplasticity is to engage in challenging activities we can't do flawlessly and learn from the errors we make along the way. Wow, that sounds amazing.
Yeah, it's something that I didn't know how powerful mistakes were before when I started reading this book. I learned it as I was writing the book. But when we think about the mechanisms that drive neuroplasticity, and neuroplasticity is the change in the kind of how our neurons in our brain are connected. And when a particular network of neurons fires together, that's what creates a thought, right? So if we want to become smarter or change the way we think, we need to change the way our neurons are wired together, and that's what neuroplasticity is. And the main mechanism that we have to change that once we are adults is by making mistakes, is by the brain making a prediction that turns out to be wrong. And then there's the chemicals that make the brain rewire if we stay with it, right? If we figure out what did I do wrong? Let me try again, or let me see what might be right. When we start making progress, then our brain starts rewiring, right? If we because we don't learn just from making mistakes, we learn from reflecting on mistakes and figuring out what can I learn from this mistake, and that's how we become smarter, and that's it's just incredibly powerful.
I think that could be its own book in and of itself. Really, really powerful. I really jammed on that. Okay, so then perhaps related, another chapter you have is on common misconceptions about learning, and you list several of them. There's two that I want to talk about in particular for the purposes of this program. The first one is the misconception that you either have a growth mindset or you don't. What's the actual reality to that?
Yeah, a lot of people kind of learn about growth mindset and get excited, and then they label themselves as I'm a growth mindset person, right? And they kind of think of themselves as I'm always in a growth mindset, and that blinds us from seeing, abilities that we might see as fixed or qualities that we might see as fixed, that we might say, oh, well, of course that's fixed. Well, that's a fixed mindset. If we think it's fixed, it might be right, it might be wrong, but we need to identify those fixed mindsets. So we all see certain qualities and abilities as fixed. Some of those assumptions might sometimes be more right, but most of the time that we see something as fixed, it turns out to be kind of based on flawed assumptions, and we're creating a self-fulfilling prophecy by thinking that it's fixed. Then we're not doing what's necessary in order to change and to improve. But also these mindsets are fluid, so sometimes we're just confused, or we're in the middle. We're not sure how we feel about the malleabilities of an ability or a quality, and these also shift. Like we might see somebody who is a fantastic performer and they look like a natural because we haven't seen their process, and that might put us into a fixed mindset, thinking, oh, I'm not capable, I'm not able to become as good as this person. So in different situations, we might be more in a fixed mindset or more in a growth mindset, and the more that we can train ourselves to see that, to become aware of when am I in a fixed mindset, then we can see what's happening and then be able to change our self-talk to what we want it to be, so that we can act in the ways that we want to act.
That happened to me, by the way, in reading your book, Eduardo. So thank you for that. I have been touting myself as I'm a growth mindset person. I'm about growth, but then I was able to identify there are aspects in my life that I employ or rely on a fixed mindset, and just recognizing that just really opened something for me. So
wonderful.
Yeah, I know.
Very
Thank you.
glad to hear that.
Yeah, thank you. Like I said, every time I tell a lot of my guests, thank you for embarrassing me in public, because invariably I read some part of the book when I'm out public, either on the airplane or I'm on the bike at the gym, and I'm like, yeah, that's it. That's exactly right. People are looking at me like, she's at it again. The weird lady's at it again. But the other,
well, what you remind me, Alise, is sometimes people think of embarrassing themselves in a different way, which is some people might think that in saying something like what you said, that there's a part of my life when I'm in a fixed mindset. Some people might feel embarrassed by acknowledging that, right? But that's what we need to do in order to develop learning communities. We need to be able to share with each other what we're learning and our insights, and also that we can all improve, and so that way we can better support each other and normalize the fact that we are all works in progress.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that, Eduardo. And and for me, in my case, I never want to apologize by being delighted by learning something. I will never apologize for that, right?
Right.
So
yeah.
So this has happened on many of occasions. People are like, "What are you reading?" I'm like, "Oh, you got to read this." Okay, so the other misconception about learning that I would love for you to address, and it really addresses what we were talking about before about the mistakes, etc. But the other misconception in that chapter that I wanted you to address is growth mindset is all about responding to setbacks and mistakes.
Right. I mean, how we respond to setbacks and mistakes is really important. We want to respond by thinking about what can I learn, what can I change going forward. But we also want to drive our growth proactively. So that means, we need to ideally, if somebody asks you or anybody, what are you working on? What are you working to improve? We should all have an answer to that, right? And we should all be mindful of what that is on a daily basis. That will get us to much higher levels in our skills and performance if we're always mindful about what we're working to improve.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, both of those really hit me. Okay, so the next part that I want to come to, and in my view, this is kind of, I think this is like your crown prince of your book. It's that growth propeller concept. And so this is in your, there's a whole chapter dedicated to this, but I really find that this whole idea, what you're talking to in that chapter, is to become a master learner and performer, work on developing your identity, beliefs, purpose, beliefs, habits, and community. These elements work together like a propeller, equipping you to move confidently toward your boldest ambitions. And the way that I love how you use models in your book too, Eduardo. That's extremely effective for me anyway, visually. So could you speak a bit about this growth propeller? I think this concept brings it all together for me.
Absolutely, and for me, I see this as a central model too.
Yes.
And the growth propeller is what we can work on in ourselves to really become the people we want to become and be able to achieve what we want to achieve. And so it's a propeller with three blades. The three blades, one of them is beliefs, the other one's habits, and the third one is community. And then the middle of the propeller, which is the axis, has two things in it: identity and purpose. And I think, Alise, you're an identity researcher, and
I
your
am.
podcast you are, and your podcast is working on purpose. So so I think these are like, I feel kinship with you in kind of how important identity and purpose are. So identity and purpose, sometimes we think of our identity or our purpose are things that are fixed, right? Or that things that we find rather than things that we develop. And these are all things that we can shape and continue to evolve throughout our lives. And they really drive how we perceive things, how we perceive ourselves, our behaviors. And they give us energy, and they give us direction for where we're going. And so when we think about identity in particular, I'll offer that we want to see ourselves as a learner, as a work in progress, as someone who's always continued to evolve. And there might be other parts of our identity that shift over time. Like, I might become a mother, and that's a new identity for me. And then I might become, an executive, and that's a new identity, or a mentor. We want kind of our identity to be shifting throughout life, but the more that we lean into being a learner and always a work in progress, that's going to work toward us. And then, your podcast is all about working on purpose, and purpose gives us direction, it gives us meaning, it gives us a greater experience of life. And then in terms of beliefs, habits, and community, there's a lot of beliefs, like growth mindset is an example where, if we're in a growth mindset, thinking that abilities can be developed, that has lots of consequences, versus a fixed mindset, we can think about our beliefs about transparency, how much I share, how transparently I share it with others, and is that a strength? Often when we share what we're thinking, what we're feeling, that helps other people support us, that builds relationships, that helps us both learn and collaborate together. So habits drive our behavior. So what are our proactive habits, our responsive habits? And then what kind of community are we developing? Who are the people around us? What do they value? What do we talk about? And how do we collaborate together on a daily basis? And so when we work on these five components, we're really crafting our lives and crafting ourselves to be the people that we want to become.
Mm. Incredibly compelling, Eduardo. I think that it's so tight and cogent the way you put that together, and thus it's very accessible. So I just really thought that was the crown gem of what you really created there. If we move on to, you're getting later as the book progresses, you go through leadership, you go into learning organizations, et cetera. And I definitely want to talk, and I align with this because I did talk about this in, I think, my second leadership book. But you talk about the importance of ditching performance-only evaluation systems. Amen, brother. Amen. Could you say a little bit more about why you think that's important to ditch?
Well, when companies think about performance management and the systems to manage performance, often they're only focused on performance and not learning, right? And so
Right.
that gets everybody focused on only performing. And when we focus only on performing, our performance suffers. That's the performance paradox. And so in order to elevate our performance and our results, we have to engage in performing, but also engage in learning. And we can manage the process so that make sure that people are doing that. So part of our performance management systems can be where people identify not only their performance goals, what they want to achieve, but also their learning goals. What do they want to learn or improve? How are they going to go about it? What resources and people might help them get there. Looking back, like, what did I focus on in the last period in terms of my learning, and did it work? Did I get better? So that we're keeping each other accountable, not only to performing, but also to learning and actual improvement. And if we're not improving, then how do we change what we're doing so that we do it differently, so that we can, stay accountable to improvement and to higher performance?
The other thing around those sort of things that I thought was compelling that aligns with that too for me, Eduardo, is you really are not a fan of forced ranking. Because it creates a competitive zone versus more of a collaborative learning zone. And I absolutely agree with that. I think it's also very demoralizing for people. But can you say a bit more about why you don't see that as providing the value that people think it does?
Sure. So forced ranking first comes with an assumption that talent is fixed, right? Is
Right.
something that you have to find and um, kind of figure out who has the talent and who doesn't, and let's get rid of the people who don't, rather than focusing on developing talent, and the idea that everybody can grow and everybody can become successful. So that's one problem. The other problem is that it gets people to compete with each other inside of the organization. They start withholding information, for example, and you need people to share information to both learn and perform and collaborate. And so when you want people to be in the same team, working toward the same purpose, and when they're competing because you have forced rankings, that just creates a lot of problems.
Mm-hmm. I absolutely agree with that. And that was the best articulation of why I don't align with it and agree with it that I can possibly imagine. I'm glad we've got this on tape. Thank you very much. Okay, so what you have a chapter here on hiring for a growth mindset, which I think is great. We don't have a lot of time to address that, but I just want to be able to put forth what you have a whole chapter on some of the questions that leaders can engage candidates in that will help them understand if they or at least geared or could be more interested in learning or versus the fixed mindset. Could you just say a little bit about, how would they structure those questions? How would they start to discern who they're in front of?
Yeah, so we want to um, take the opportunity to look for people who have a lot of competence in terms of the technical skills that are needed for the job, but also a lot of competence as learners, right? So that they're hitting the ground running at a higher level, in their dispositions, not only in their technical skills. And so we can ask things like, what did you work on in the last year? How did you go about it? What mistakes did you make and what did you learn from those mistakes? Who have you learned a lot from, and how did you learn from them, and what did you learn from them? What do you think is going to be important for you to work on this next step in this new role? And what might be obstacles? What might be challenges for you? What might you do in those situations? Sometimes you can give them, if you don't want like that, those specific direct questions, you could give them a situation, right? And then say like, what would you do in this situation? And think about, would they be kind of looking to prove themselves and to kind of hide their deficiencies, or would they be transparent about what they're struggling with so that they can learn more from other people? You can ask these questions to reference checks. You can have them perform projects and figure out whether they act as learners in those projects. But you want to be assessing them. Do they embody the values that you have as an organization for everybody to be a learner?
Mm-hmm. What I really loved about that, I started my human capital career, I guess 25, 27 years ago in recruiting. So if you start this whole process by creating a learning organization on the front end of talent acquisition, that just made a lot of sense to me. So we're
Yeah, and I
coming
would just say, like, thinking also about your employer brand, like sending the message of what you stand for, so that people are also
absolutely
self-selecting, right? And so that the people who
right.
are afraid of feedback stay away. The people who love feedback, come toward you.
Absolutely agree with that, Eduardo. Here we are. We've managed to go right through this here. It goes by so fast. I want to give you the chance to close the conversation as you like. Leave our listeners with what you like. But I also want you to include, if you would, I like what you talk about this whole notion of, this whole journey of learning. It's not a destination. It's about the journey. And there's so much promise in your book, that last chapter especially. What would you like to leave our listeners with and say about 30 seconds?
Sure. I'll say, the big idea is, if we focus only on performing, our performance suffers. That's what we tend to be doing in some aspects of our work and life. And so if we want to increase performance, we have to also embed learning into our work and life. And like you say, it doesn't only increase performance, but also increases the process. And we have big challenges in our society. Sometimes we're too performance oriented to tackle those challenges. So we have to figure out how we include the learning zone so that we can tackle these ambitious challenges that we have in front of us.
Especially in today's ever-changing dynamic world. Eduardo, thank you so much for sharing your beautiful wisdom and your heart with our Working on Purpose listeners across the globe. Thanks for being on the show. It's great to have you.
Thank you for having me, Alise. It was great.
Listeners and viewers, if you want to learn more about Eduardo Briceno, his keynote or facilitation work, or his new book, The Performance Paradox, start by visiting his site. It's briceno.com. Let me spell that for you. BRICENO.com. Briceno.com. Last week, if you missed the live show, you can always get to the recorded podcast. We were on the air with Sandeep Nath, who is first an internal wellness coach, helping professionals, senior executives, and business owners achieve optimal health, happiness, and harmony through his transformative principles of renewalism. We talked about this on the show. He is really out to be able to generate the renewalism movement across the planet. It's pretty powerful what he's up to. Next week, we'll be on the air with Hortense Legentile, talking about her new book, The Unlocked Leader, Dare to Free Your Own Voice, Lead with Empathy, and Shine Your Light in the World. She will teach us how to be much more human, authentic leaders for better business results, and to inspire people to realize their potential in the process. See you there. Remember that work is one of the best adventures and means of realizing our potential and making the impact we crave. So let's work on purpose.
We hope you've enjoyed this week's program. Be sure to tune in to Working on Purpose, featuring your host, Dr. Alise Cortez, each week on W4CY. Together, we'll create a world where business operates conscientiously, leadership inspires impassioned performance, and employees are fulfilled in work that provides the meaning and purpose they crave. See you there. Let's work on purpose.